July 5th, 1787. The Grand Convention's Select Committee that had worked over the 4th brings back its celebrated compromise, the lower branch of the legislature to be based on population, and in the upper branch, each state to have an equal vote. James Wilson doesn't like it at all.
The committee gentlemen have exceeded their powers.
Madison is aghast.
An unhappy dilemma. 2/3 of the inhabitants of the Union are to please the remaining 1/3 by sacrificing their essential rights.
I have no hesitancy in saying that the form as well as the manner of the report is objectionable.
Governor Morris, Pennsylvania, is fierce in his disapproval. The tall boy, they call him. 35, shrewd, sophisticated, an aristocrat lawyer with a wooden leg. It does not diminish his reputation with the ladies.
I came here as a representative of America. This country must be united. If the small states do not yield, there will be civil commotion. Scenes of horror will result that cannot be described. If persuasion cannot unite this country, the sword will.
Mr. Bedford, Delaware?
Perhaps I ought to apologize for some of my earlier remarks. I am a lawyer, and warmth is natural and sometimes necessary in my profession. But there is no apology for Mr. Governor Morris's threats of the sword uniting.
Colonel Mason.
Gentlemen, there must be some accommodation on this point.
Colonel George Mason, Virginia, is 62, a planter aristocrat. He owns about 300 slaves. Yet he drafted Virginia's famous Declaration of Rights, which proclaimed the natural freedom and equality of all men.
May be liable to objections, but it's preferable to an appeal to the world by different sides, as some gentlemen have talked about. It could not be more inconvenient for any gentleman to remain absent from his private affairs than it is for me. But I would rather bury my bones in this city than expose the country to the consequences of a dissolution of this convention without anything being done.
To avoid a showdown, the delegates drift to other questions. Slavery, admission of new western states. Wilson and Governor Morris, the two Pennsylvanians, split on the share of power new states should have. Morris, a man of wealth and property, wants the Atlantic states to keep a majority of votes.
It must be apparent that the western lands will not be able to furnish men equally enlightened to share in the administration of our common interests. The busy haunts of men, and not the remote wilderness, is the proper school of political talent.
Wilson disagrees. Is he thinking of his own heavy speculation in western lands?
Should not the majority of the people, wherever found, govern the minority in all questions? If the interior country should acquire this majority, it will not only have the right, but will take it whether we will or no. I do not agree that property is the sole or even the primary object of government and society. The cultivation and improvement of the human mind is the most noble object.
July 16th. The convention confronts the unavoidable. The delegates vote 5-4 to give the smaller states an equal vote in the second branch of the legislature. Governor Randolph of Virginia is about to take a walk.
Gentlemen, I think we are unprepared to discuss this subject further. The time has come for the large states to consider the proper steps to be taken in the present solemn crisis of the business, and for the small states to deliberate the means of conciliation. Let the convention stand adjourned.
What?
Patterson of New Jersey.
If the governor will put that in the form of a motion, I will agree. The small states will not conciliate on any other ground than that of an equal vote in the second branch. Let the convention stand adjourned. Let the rule of secrecy be rescinded. We will consult our constituents.
General Pinckney, South Carolina.
Does the governor mean an adjournment for the day or an adjournment sine die? I could not possibly think of going all the way to South Carolina and returning again to this place.
General, I have in mind only an adjournment until tomorrow.
The little states are adamant. Next morning, before the convention convenes, some of the delegates from the large states hold a caucus. Madison afterwards reported.
Some of us argued, let the small states go. We'll propose a form of government based on a majority of the people of America and take it to them.
Well, I couldn't agree more.
Well, others were inclined to yield on the point of an equal vote.
I agree there.
How important is it, they argued? Shall we risk the failure of the convention by insisting on it?
Well,
Several of the small state delegates had been invited.
It was all a waste of time. They simply couldn't agree. I'm completely satisfied we have nothing more to apprehend from a union of the large states against a compromise.
Absolutely agree with you.
The battle for the mode of electing the executive now begins in earnest. The target, Resolution 9, a single executive chosen by the national legislature. Governor Morris proposes something far more radical.
Mr. President, I move to strike out national legislature and insert citizens of the United States.
Wilson backs him immediately.
My particular objection to an absolute election by the legislature is this. The executive would be too dependent to stand as a mediator between the intrigues and sinister views of the representatives and the general liberties and interests of the people.
Roger Sherman, Connecticut, opposes election of the executive by the people.
The people, sir, will never be sufficiently informed of the characters of the men proposed for the executive. They will generally vote for some man in their own state, and the larger states will have the best chance of the appointment.
Virginia's Colonel Mason supports Sherman.
gentlemen, I conceive it to be as unnatural to refer the choice of a proper character for chief magistrate to the people as it would to refer a trial of colors to a blind man. The extent of the country renders it impossible that the people can have the requisite capacity to judge of the respective pretensions of the candidates.
The motion for direct popular election of the executive is lost, but Governor Morris, in arguing for a second term for the executive, keeps hammering at the special relationship the chief magistrate must have to the people.
The executive magistrate should be the guardian of the people, even of the lower classes, against the great and wealthy, who in the course of things will necessarily compose the legislative body. If he is to be the guardian of the people, let him be appointed by the people.
If the executive is elected by the legislature, reason some of the delegates, he should not be eligible for re-election, for there is the danger of his trafficking with the legislators. Still, the same delegates are in a quandary, for they do not want to bar a good executive from a second term.
Mr. President,
Mr. King.
I do not like the ineligibility principle.
Rufus King, Massachusetts, 32, Harvard, married to an heiress.
That if a man has proven himself fit for office, the Constitution should not exclude him from holding it. On the whole, I am of the opinion that an appointment by electors chosen by the people for the purpose would be liable to the least objections.
Wilson seizes the opportunity to go back to his original ideas.
The delegates seem unanimous in their wish not to have the legislature appoint the executive unless he be rendered ineligible a second time. I perceive with pleasure that my original proposal is gaining ground. An election immediately by electors or immediately by the people.
The large states favor the electoral method because they have more people. The small states lean to the choice of the executive by the national legislature, where they have an equal vote in one branch.
Mr. President.
Mr. Ellsworth.
Oliver Ellsworth, Connecticut, a small state man, tries a middle course.
The executive, I move as follows: that we strike out the appointment by the national legislature and insert to be chosen by electors appointed by the legislatures of the states.
The motion is carried, but less than a week later, July 24th, the delegates have voted to reconsider. Then Washington recognizes William Churchill Houston, New Jersey.
I move that the executive be appointed by the national legislature instead of by electors appointed by the legislatures of the states.
The motion is seconded, and North Carolina's Williamson supports it.
Observe, gentlemen, we have lodged the executive power in one man. A single magistrate will be an elective king and will feel the spirit of one. He will spare no pains to keep himself in for life. And then he will lay a train for the succession of his children. It is pretty certain that we shall have a king at some time or other. And we ought to omit no precaution that will postpone the event as long as possible. And the only possible way to do this is to render the executive ineligible a second time and let the national legislature elect him.
Houston's motion that the national legislature choose the executive is carried 7-4. Now, obviously, to make him independent of the legislature, he must be barred from re-election. Therefore, the delegates reason the executive must have a long term in the hope that able men will serve longer. Maryland's Luther Martin.
I move that the appointment of the executive by the legislature shall be for 11 years.
I suggest 15 years.
Why not 20 years? That's the medium life for princes.
James Wilson relishes the predicament of the convention, floundering between election by the national legislature and the desire for a strong independent executive. Governor Morris dramatizes the dilemma.
It is the most difficult of all, rightly to balance the executive. Make him too weak, the legislature will usurp his powers. Make him too strong, he will usurp the legislature.
Wilson makes a canny move. He casually throws out an admittedly undigested mode for choosing the executive.
Let the national legislature choose not more than 15 men, by lot, and let those chosen retire immediately and elect the executive. The mode would avoid intrigue and diminish dependence.
Gary of Massachusetts is shocked.
Why, this is committing entirely too much to chance. Suppose the lot falls on 15 unworthy men. Then the country must be saddled with an unworthy executive.
Rufus King.
This is absurd. Surely the gentleman from Pennsylvania thinks we ought to be governed by reason and not by chance.
I did not move it as the best mode. My opinion remains unshaken that the people ought to elect the executive.
Nobody seems to be satisfied, Mr. President. Why don't we postpone the whole matter?
I second the postponement.
No one objects, but the next day the problem of how to choose the executive is still there, an incubus that will not be banished. Madison pushes for Wilson's original electoral scheme.
That mode, it seems to me, is greatly preferable to an appointment by the national legislature. The electors would be chosen exclusively for the occasion. They would meet at once and proceed immediately to the appointment. Very little opportunity would present itself for cabal, intrigue, or corruption.
The delegates thrash about for alternatives. Ellsworth, Connecticut.
Let the legislature appoint the executive for the first term. And if we make him eligible for re-election, let the various states then appoint electors to choose him for the second term.
Gary of Massachusetts.
Let the governors and presidents of the states appoint the executive with the advice of their councils.
Delaware's John Dickinson is suddenly enthusiastic about an entirely new notion.
Let the people of each state choose its best citizen. Then let each state submit the name of its most eminent character to the national legislature, and let the legislature as a whole, or by the appointment of electors, choose one of the 13 to be the chief executive.
Virginia's Colonel Mason reviews all the proposals, rejects them all, and moves a return to the method originally proposed by the Virginia delegation when the debate on the presidency first began.
Namely, that the executive be chosen by the national legislature for 7 years and to be ineligible for re-election.
The question is put, the motion is carried, 6 states to 3. The matter, though, is not settled, and the issue will come up again. On August 6th, a committee of detail brings in the first draft of the Constitution. The preamble had read, "The people and the states." But Wilson had persuaded the committee to change it to, "We the people of the states." The draft, for the first time, uses the term, "the President of the United States," and adds that his title shall be, "His Excellency."
Mr. President.
Charles Pinckney, 29, a handsome, vain South Carolina dandy, captured by the British during the war.
The powers of the President have been significantly enlarged in the draft proposed by the committee. He is now Commander-in-Chief of the Army, Navy, and state militias. He can appoint officers and convene the Congress. It will be prudent, I think, when such great powers are entrusted, to connect the tie of property with that of reputation. I therefore move that the President be required to swear that he possesses an unencumbered estate. And I suggest that the minimum figure be $100,000.
The author of Poor Richard's Almanac opposes the motion.
I must say that I dislike everything that tends to debase the spirit of the common people. Some of the greatest rogues I know are the richest rogues.
Pinckney's motion is rejected by so general a no that the states are not even polled. August 24th. The delegates are anxious to get it over with, go home. The convention comes to Article 10, which states that the president shall be elected by ballot by the legislature.
Mr. President.
Mr. Carroll.
Daniel Carroll, a delegate from Maryland, reopens the old issue that everyone knew had not been settled.
I move to strike out election by the legislature and insert by the people.
The motion is lost. Only Pennsylvania and Delaware vote aye. But a few moments later, Morris again moves the less radical proposal.
That the president shall be chosen by electors to be chosen by the people of the several states.
This motion is also lost, but Virginia and Connecticut join Pennsylvania and Delaware in favor of it. Wilson's electoral method has picked up 2 states. August 31st. The convention has finished its work on the Constitution's first draft. The document is about to be turned over to a committee which will work out unresolved problems.
Mr. President.
Gouverneur Morris.
The last article of this draft, the 23rd, provides that the new Congress, when the Constitution has been duly ratified by the states, shall meet and choose the president. I move to strike out the words choose the president in view of the fact that we have not yet determined on a method for choosing the president.
On the vote, Maryland divides, New Hampshire votes no, all the other states vote aye. It is clear that most of the delegates had been unhappy about the decision to let the national legislature choose the president. The mode of electing the president now goes to the committee along with other unresolved problems. Wilson is not a member of that committee, but Morris is. Behind closed doors, he fights for an electoral scheme. And on September 4th, when the committee reports, Wilson is elated to find that a system much like his own has been included in the draft.
Governor Randolph.
Mr. President, I ask, and the honorable gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Pinckney, is of a similar mind, for a particular explanation and discussion of the reasons for changing the mode of electing the executive.
Governor Morris rises on his one wooden leg.
The indispensable necessity is to make the executive independent of the legislature. The electoral scheme achieves this goal. It will be impossible to corrupt the electors because they will vote at the same time throughout the United States and at so great a distance from each other.
Rutledge of South Carolina.
I move to postpone the committee's report and to take up the original plan of appointing the president by the legislature.
The motion to postpone is lost. The convention has finally, decisively accepted Wilson's plan. The president, freed from his dependence on Congress, can now be eligible for re-election.
Mr. Pinckney, South Carolina.
Sir, the committee's proposal has one serious defect. It provides that the Senate shall make the final choice of a president if the 2 highest candidates with a majority have an equal number of votes. I suppose the committee thinks that this will rarely happen. But observe, the electors of the various states will, in their original choices, vote for a man of their own state because they will not have a sufficient knowledge of candidates in other states. What will the result be? A dispersal of the votes, no man having a majority.
Colonel Mason of Virginia had predicted the consequences.
Why, in 19 times out of 20, the election of the president will be thrown to the Senate, a most improper body for that purpose.
James Wilson joins the attack on the Senate's role in electing the president.
If the Senate appoints the president, it will influence his appointment of officers, particularly the officers of the Judiciary Department. Now, the Senate makes treaties, tries impeachments. Thus, the legislative, judicial, and executive powers are dangerously blended. The president will not be the man of the people as he ought to be. He will be the minion of the Senate.
On September 6th, Roger Sherman suggests a substitute method.
Mr. President, I move to strike out the words, here, the Senate shall immediately choose, etc., and insert, the House of Representatives shall immediately choose by ballot one of them for president, the members from each state having one vote.
Very good.
It is an astonishingly simple switch, but it unties the convention's last Gordian knot. The vote is 10-1 in favor. By throwing the election of a president to the House of Representatives in case of a tie, the small states lose nothing, for each state in the House has an equal vote. But power deemed excessive for the Senate has been cut down, and this is a concession by the small states. The legislature will not choose the president. The people will not elect him directly. Between the president and those qualified to vote, a mediating machinery will filter the national consensus. An electoral college, a unique body assembling briefly for one purpose only every 4 years. James Wilson, Pennsylvania delegate, has won his fight. The chief executive, in his mind, is to be the president by the people, for the people, and of the people. April 23rd, 1789. The pageantry of a ruler elected to dignity, yet wearing the sentimental aura of a crown, is enacted along the New York waterfront. Thousands of cheering people line the docks as Washington arrives for his inauguration. The president-elect is borne across the bay from New Jersey by a resplendent barge manned by 13 oarsmen. A male chorus on a passing sloop salutes him with special stanzas of God Save the King. The flags of more than 20 countries fly from masts. Guns boom from harbor artillery, the British packet, the Spanish sloop of war. The House and Senate, when Washington has landed, discuss his title.
A majority of the Senate, gentlemen, favors His Highness, the President of the United States of America and protector of their liberty.
His Highness, what is the intention of this business?
Representative Thomas Tucker, South Carolina.
Does the dignity of the nation consist in the exaltation of one man and the humiliation of all the rest? This spirit of mimicry will be the ruin of our country.
April 30th, inauguration morning. Washington powders his hair and dresses carefully in a suit of brown broadcloth spun at Hartford, Connecticut, to advertise American industry. He puts on his best white silk stockings, his silver shoe buckles, and fastens on a dress sword in a steel scabbard. And when he has taken the oath of office on the portico overlooking Wall Street and bowed to the cheering multitude, he does not make his inaugural address to the people. He withdraws into the Senate chamber and reads from his paper.
Fellow citizens of the Senate and of the House of Representatives, among the vicissitudes incident to life, no events could have filled me with greater anxieties than that of which the notification...
The president is a magnet. His power attracts, but it also repels. The delegates to the Grand Convention who invented the office knew that nothing can be done without power, but they also knew that men who wield it may misuse it. Their mechanism for choosing a ruler was designed for inevitable tension, as intimated by Dr. Franklin in a conversation, September 1787, with a certain Mrs. Powell of Philadelphia.
Well, Dr. Franklin, the Grand Convention stands adjourned and the new Constitution is done. What have you given us? A republic or a monarchy?
A republic, madam, if you can keep it.
Miss McLennan. Sir, the Constitution does not give you the right to carry on this war without permission from Congress. And I'm sure that you realize that more than anybody. In view of this misunderstanding that has occurred about the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, why don't you clear up this matter with your critics by calling for a new vote in Congress on this matter?
You don't always clear up your critics that easily. They will be with you before the vote, and they'll be with you after the vote. That's the way it is in a democratic society.